My father pointed at me and called me a disgrace, so I showed him what purpose looks like. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Bryn, and the day my father Cal pointed at me during a family dinner and called me a disgrace, something inside me finally broke. Everyone went quiet. No one spoke up. I wanted the floor to swallow me, but instead, I stayed still and listened to every word. Growing up, Cal always favored my brother Jax. Jax could fail and still get praise. I worked hard and was told it wasn't enough. When my mother died, Cal promised he would help me with college. I trusted him. Later, I learned he used my savings to support Jax's business idea. When I asked about it, Cal said I needed to toughen up and earn my own way. That night after the dinner, I packed a bag and left. I had no plan, no money, and no support. The first months were hard. I worked long hours, lived in small rooms, and skipped meals. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep. But every morning, I got up again. Slowly, life changed. I learned new skills, saved what little I could, and stayed focused. I stopped trying to prove myself to anyone. I was building a life for me. Years later, Cal reached out. Jax's business had failed, and they needed help. I listened calmly and said no. Not with anger, not with pride, just honesty. I told him I had learned how to stand on my own. Walking away that day felt different. I wasn't running anymore. I finally understood my purpose wasn't to earn his approval. It was to choose myself, even when no one else did. From my earliest memories, approval in our home came with conditions I never fully understood. I watched how attention flowed naturally toward Jax, as if it belonged to him by birthright. When he spoke, smiles followed. When I spoke, silence settled in. Praise reached him easily, while correction always found me first. Cal believed discipline built character, but his version felt selective. Every small mistake I made turned into a lesson delivered with sharp words and cold looks. If I asked questions, I was told I talked too much. If I stayed quiet, I lacked confidence. No matter the choice, the result was the same. I learned early that safety depended on staying invisible. Jax could come home late, forget responsibilities, or change plans without warning. Excuses were made for him. I was expected to anticipate needs before they were spoken. When I succeeded, it was normal. When I failed, it became proof of weakness. I tried harder, hoping effort might unlock warmth, yet the rules kept shifting. Affection arrived only after meeting expectations, and even then, it felt temporary. A good grade earned a nod, not a hug. Completing chores brought relief, not comfort. I began measuring my worth through tasks instead of feelings, believing love was something earned through performance. Inside those walls, I learned to listen more than speak and to apologize even when confused. I studied moods, adjusted tone, and shrank parts of myself to fit what was allowed. Childhood passed without softness, replaced by caution and self-doubt. By the time I understood something was wrong, the pattern felt permanent. I believed acceptance existed, just not for me. That belief followed me quietly, shaping choices and fears, teaching me to expect less and prepare for disappointment. After my mother's funeral, the house felt hollow, but Cal spoke with certainty. He said my future mattered. He looked me in the eye and assured me school was covered, that I should focus on preparing for the next chapter. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe him. I planned carefully. I chose programs, filled out forms, and imagined a life shaped by learning rather than survival. That promise became something I held on to during lonely nights. It felt like proof that, despite everything, I still mattered to him in some way. The truth surfaced by accident. I overheard a late-night phone call, hushed and urgent. Numbers were mentioned. Deadlines. Risks. Jax's name kept coming up. The next morning, I checked paperwork stored in an old folder. What I found left my hands shaking. The money set aside for my education was gone. When I confronted Cal, he didn't deny it. He didn't even hesitate. He said Jax had potential and needed a chance. He said opportunities don't wait. Then he looked at me like I was naive and told me hardship builds strength. According to him, I would benefit from struggling. I stood there, stunned, realizing the decision had been made long before I knew. My future had been traded away quietly, without a conversation, without consent. What hurt most wasn't the loss of money. It was understanding how easily my path was erased. Cal framed it as wisdom. He claimed he was teaching responsibility. Yet Jax received investment while I received a lecture. The message was clear. I wasn't worth the same risk. That moment changed how I saw everything. Trust collapsed. The hope I had carefully built disappeared. I nodded, said nothing, and walked away carrying a truth heavier than grief. When it mattered most, I was never the choice. That evening gathering was meant to be ordinary. Plates clinked, conversations overlapped, and the smell of food filled the room. I sat quietly, answering when spoken to, careful not to draw attention. Then Cal raised his voice, smiling like he was about to tell a joke. He spoke about drive and ambition, then turned his eyes toward me. With a laugh, he labeled me lazy and lacking direction. The table reacted with soft chuckles and lowered gazes. What followed wasn't shock, it was agreement. Heads moved up and down. No one questioned him. I searched faces around me, hoping for interruption or discomfort. An aunt stared into her glass. A cousin focused on their plate. Someone cleared their throat, but the conversation continued. Their quiet acceptance cut deeper than the insult itself. It felt like a verdict everyone had already agreed on. Cal kept talking, listing what he believed I hadn't achieved, comparing paths, measuring value through outcomes I was never given the tools to reach. Each sentence pressed heavier on my chest. I wanted to speak, to explain, to remind them of truths they ignored. My voice stayed trapped. The room felt smaller by the second. Laughter resumed, dishes passed, and the moment moved on, except for me. I sat frozen, realizing how long this image of me had existed in their minds. I wasn't misunderstood. I was defined. No one asked for my side. No one offered balance. Their silence became confirmation. I wasn't family in that moment, I was an example of what not to become. When the meal ended, goodbyes were exchanged like nothing had happened. I walked out carrying more than embarrassment. I carried clarity. That night showed me exactly where I stood and how easily I could be dismissed. I didn't cry right away. I felt numb. But beneath that numbness, something solid formed. If they needed me to be the failure, I would stop trying to correct them. I would let results speak later, far from that table. Night settled in as the house grew still. I waited until every light dimmed, then moved through my room without turning anything on. I chose only what fit into a single bag: clothes, a notebook, a photo tucked between pages. Everything else stayed behind, including the version of me that kept hoping for change. The door closed without a sound. I paused on the porch, breathing in the cold air, knowing there would be no calls asking where I was going. My pockets were empty. There was no backup plan, no address to return to if things fell apart. Fear sat heavy in my chest, but I stepped forward anyway. Each block I walked felt like separation. Memories tried to pull me back, shared mornings, old routines, moments that once felt safe. Grief followed close behind, sharp and constant. I missed my mother more than ever, wishing she could see me choosing myself instead of shrinking. Anger kept my feet moving. Not loud rage, but a steady heat that refused to cool. I replayed every moment of being overlooked, every time I waited for fairness that never arrived. That anger wasn't destructive, it was fuel. I found a bench near a closed storefront and rested there until dawn. Cars passed. A train sounded in the distance. The world kept moving, unaware that my life had split into before and after. I watched the sky lighten and made a decision that felt permanent. I promised myself I would never kneel for acceptance that came with conditions. I would stop chasing recognition from someone who saw me as lesser. Whatever came next, struggle, loneliness, uncertainty, I would face it standing. When the sun rose fully, I lifted the bag onto my shoulder and walked toward an unknown future. I didn't know where I'd sleep or how I'd manage, but I knew one thing clearly. I had left with nothing tangible, yet I carried something stronger than support, resolve. The weeks that followed tested me in ways I never expected. I accepted work that drained my body and blurred my days together. Long hours left my hands sore and my mind foggy, yet I showed up early and left late. Rest became rare. Still, I kept going. Shelter changed often. Some places were cramped, others barely quiet enough to sleep. Thin walls carried noises I didn't want to hear. Nights felt endless. I lay awake staring at ceilings, holding back tears so no one would notice. Loneliness pressed hardest after dark. Meals were simple and sometimes skipped. I learned how to stretch little into enough. Each dollar mattered. I tracked every expense carefully, knowing mistakes would cost more than comfort. Pride faded quickly, replaced by necessity. Asking for help felt impossible, so I learned to rely on myself. Rejections arrived frequently. Applications went unanswered. Promises dissolved. Doors closed without explanation. Each time, disappointment surfaced, then passed. I refused to let setbacks define me. Instead, they shaped patience and endurance. I stopped expecting fairness and focused on progress. Slowly, habits formed. I woke early, organized my days, and set small goals. Finishing tasks brought quiet satisfaction. Discipline replaced chaos. Humility followed close behind. I learned how little I truly needed and how strong I could become without applause. There were moments I almost quit. Exhaustion whispered that stopping would be easier. Doubt tried to convince me I was proving nothing. During those moments, I remembered why I left. That memory kept me upright. With time, something shifted inside. I began to respect myself, not for achievements, but for persistence. Surviving without shortcuts taught me integrity. I learned to trust my judgment and value my effort. Pain didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped controlling me. Each hardship sharpened my focus rather than weakening it. I wasn't unbreakable, yet I discovered I was far more durable than anyone ever believed. Time passed, and exhaustion slowly gave way to clarity. I stopped chasing roles others imagined for me and began listening inward. I paid attention to what held my focus, what made long hours feel meaningful rather than heavy. That awareness guided my choices more than advice ever had. I explored options quietly, learning through trial rather than permission. Some attempts failed quickly. Others lasted long enough to teach me what didn't belong in my life. Each lesson refined my direction. I wasn't rushing anymore. I understood that rushing had never helped me before. Consistency became my anchor. I showed up daily, even when progress felt invisible. Small improvements stacked slowly. Skill sharpened. Confidence grew without noise. Stability didn't arrive suddenly, it settled in gradually, like balance returning after a long fall. I measured growth differently now. Instead of approval, I valued independence. Instead of recognition, I sought peace. Income increased step by step, matched by structure and planning. I learned how to manage responsibility without fear. Control replaced chaos. There were no shortcuts. Every gain came from effort repeated when motivation disappeared. I faced setbacks without panic, knowing recovery was possible. Experience taught me patience. I stopped comparing timelines and focused on direction. Eventually, I noticed something unfamiliar: pride. Not arrogance, not defiance, just quiet satisfaction. I had built something sustainable with no borrowed support. My foundation rested on truth, not performance. That mattered more than outcomes. Purpose revealed itself through alignment. My work reflected my values. My routine supported my health. My goals matched my limits and strengths. Nothing felt forced anymore. For the first time, my life made sense to me. I didn't need validation to confirm progress. Results spoke privately. Security followed naturally. What once felt unreachable became normal through persistence. Looking back, pain had shaped clarity. Struggle carved discipline. Loss created direction. I hadn't escaped hardship, I had transformed it. Everything I gained came from effort I could stand behind. That honesty made success real, and mine. A long stretch of silence ended one afternoon with an unexpected call. I recognized Cal's number instantly. My hand hovered before answering, surprised it still affected me. When I finally picked up, his voice sounded unfamiliar, lower, hesitant, stripped of authority. He didn't ask how I was living. He didn't mention time lost. He spoke carefully, choosing phrases as if testing fragile ground. Jax's plans had collapsed. Debts replaced dreams. Confidence vanished. What once looked promising had unraveled, leaving consequences he could no longer manage alone. There was no remorse in his tone, only urgency. He explained the situation like a problem needing correction. Support was required. Direction was missing. For the first moment in my memory, Cal paused mid-sentence, uncertain how to continue. That pause said more than any confession could. When we met, I barely recognized him. His posture had changed. Shoulders curved inward. Hands fidgeted. The certainty that once filled every room was gone. He avoided direct eye contact, as if unsure of his position. I listened without interrupting, noticing how carefully he watched my reactions. He spoke about responsibility, about family sticking together when things fall apart. Yet there was no acknowledgement of past decisions. No recognition of what had been taken. He simply assumed I would step in, the way he once assumed I would accept less. For a brief second, roles felt reversed. He waited. I considered the distance between who he had been and who stood before me. Strength had shifted quietly over time, without announcement. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. His need didn't give him authority. His uncertainty didn't create obligation. I realized how far I had come, not because he now needed me, but because I no longer needed him. That meeting ended without resolution. As I walked away, I understood the change wasn't his vulnerability. It was my independence. The balance had shifted, not through confrontation, but through growth he never expected. I listened until he finished speaking, then took a slow breath. There was no rush in me, no shaking hands, no urge to defend or attack. Silence filled the space between us, steady and controlled. He waited, expecting an answer shaped by obligation. I told him I couldn't do what he was asking. My voice stayed level. There was no anger behind it, no satisfaction either. I explained that my life was built through my own effort, guided by lessons learned without guidance. I said I had discovered value that didn't depend on his approval or permission. He stared at me, clearly unprepared for refusal delivered without emotion. His mouth opened, then closed again. He searched my face for hesitation, for softness he could use, but found none. What stood before him wasn't defiance. It was certainty. I added that my choices now came from boundaries, not resentment. That I wished him well, but I wouldn't step back into a role shaped by imbalance. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. The room felt different then. The power he once carried had nowhere to land. He shifted in his seat, confused by the calm he couldn't influence. There was nothing to argue against. No insults to counter. No anger to control. His expression changed slowly. Pride faded. Expectation dissolved. What replaced it was recognition, quiet and heavy. He finally saw the distance created by years of decisions, and for the first time, he understood it couldn't be crossed with demands. I stood to leave. He didn't stop me. He didn't raise his voice. He just watched, absorbing the moment he never thought would come. That look held regret, surprise, and something close to loss. Walking away, I felt no triumph. The revenge wasn't in denying help. It was in becoming someone who could say no without fear. I had reclaimed ownership of my worth, and nothing he said could take it back. Purpose finally revealed itself quietly, without applause or acknowledgement. It wasn't about titles, paychecks, or recognition from anyone else. It was measured in the decisions I made daily, in the routines I created to honor my own values rather than meet someone else's expectations. I learned to trust my instincts, to prioritize what nourished my mind and body. Every choice became intentional: where to work, how to spend my time, and who to let close. I stopped seeking permission. Each step built confidence, each boundary reinforced self-respect. Freedom became the clearest sign of progress. I could act without fear of judgment, speak without hesitation, and rest without guilt. The weight of needing approval lifted, replaced by a sense of ownership over my own life. That clarity had been absent for so long, yet now it felt like the foundation I had been searching for. Even setbacks no longer shook me the way they once did. I approached challenges with patience and thought, not panic or self-doubt. Every obstacle was simply part of the path I had chosen, not proof of my inadequacy. The struggle that had once felt endless now seemed like preparation for this peace. Relationships, work, and responsibilities all gained meaning because I engaged with them on my terms. I celebrated growth quietly, knowing it wasn't about recognition. Satisfaction came from alignment, living authentically, guided by principles I set, not standards imposed. Looking back, I realized purpose had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong. It wasn't a trophy or a statement for others. It was the courage to remain true to myself, to honor my worth, and to build a life shaped by intention, not expectation. Finally, I understood what it meant to stand fully in my own power. Purpose was my choice, my voice, and my freedom, a life no betrayal, no criticism, and no shadow could ever take away. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my father and brother, or should I have given them another chance? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more real-life stories like mine.